Welcome everyone to the 2022 Action Forum for Youth. We're so happy that you've taken your time out of your busy day today to join us. My name is Marty Moraldo and I'm the Executive Director of Influence the Choice. So ITC is happy to work together with the Issaquah Schools Foundation to provide community leaders like yourselves with the information vital to understanding our students' current mental health needs. Sharing information leads us to finding shared solutions to the challenges facing today's youth. A special thanks to Carolyn Kennedy, Director of Programs at ISF, for her partnership in bringing this event to you today. And by the way, we are recording this event and we'll make it available to you over the next several days, or in the next few days. Joining me for this presentation, we have Issaquah School, whoops, that's the wrong picture. Issaquah School District Superintendent Ron Thiele, our data analyst from TrueBearings LLC, Nathan Brown, and State Representative Lisa Callan, who will provide a brief legislative update. We think it's important to understand both the data around challenges impacting young people, as well as hearing from our students. As well, with today's students panel, our students today are Julia Krupkin and Addie Powell and Cameron Ma. Now for a brief welcome, let me introduce Superintendent Ron Thiele. Ron has been the superintendent of the Issaquah School District for 9 years, but his time in the district spans decades. As you may know, Superintendent Thiele is retiring at the end of this school year, but he is leaving an indelible mark on our district, especially with his focus on the mental well-being of our students. Let me publicly say thank you to Ron for your years of service. You will be missed.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. And I was about to call you Director Moraldo, but in this case, it's Executive Director Moraldo. You've got a different hat on today. So good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to briefly speak before today's Healthy Youth Survey presentation. First, I do want to acknowledge and thank Influence the Choice for the excellent work this organization has done now for many years in our community, helping our young people make good, healthy, and appropriate choices, particularly in the areas of substance use and abuse, which we know is also tied into issues of mental health for our students in the Issaquah School District. ITC has grown to be an outstanding community partner and an important part of our village as we all work together to create a safe, fun, productive environment for our young people to learn, grow, and prosper. I also have to thank and acknowledge the Issaquah Schools Foundation for their support of Influence the Choice and sponsorship of this important event. The collaboration among Influence the Choice and the Issaquah Schools Foundation and the Issaquah School District is a wonderful example of how community partners come together to make good things happen for our youth. To everyone who is here tonight or sees this presentation later, please consider contributing to each of these outstanding organizations as an important way to support the students of the ISD. I just had to put that plug in there for the foundation and Influence the Choice. I also want to recognize Dr. Nathan Brown and his staff for the terrific work they do analyzing our Healthy Youth Survey data and presenting some of the key findings in an understandable manner that helps us turn the learning into action and help support our students. This annual event is an example of how caring people come together to better educate our community and students. I know Dr. Brown and team will be explaining what the Healthy Youth Survey is and how the survey, how the data from this will inform our efforts to keep our students healthy. But I also wanted to acknowledge the good work of our Issaquah School District teachers, counselors, administrators, and support staff for the logistical challenge and management that goes into administering this important and comprehensive survey to thousands of ISD students every other year. I did want to share a couple of examples of how the Issaquah School District has used Healthy Youth Survey data over the years. First of all, the Healthy Youth Survey information is used to inform our multi-tiered systems of support, or our MTSS work. As an example, when we see areas of concern around teen alcohol use, we add this information into our student messages that might go out before events such as proms or other school activities and dances. The information also finds its way into curricular and lessons that are in the curriculum, such as in our health curriculum or in some of our social emotional learning activities. We also, this is true of the information like you're going to learn about this year too, related to anxiety, some mental health issues such as anxiety or school phobia. Again, this information informs our interventions, our intervention planning, and even our curriculum. One other example of how healthy youth survey data has been used over the years in the Issaquah School District is in the area of vaping. A few years ago, we saw a big uptick in our vaping use, according to the Healthy Youth Survey, and what we were experiencing on the ground out in our schools as well. This led to increased supervision in terms of looking for vaping and the addition of vape detectors in our secondary school bathrooms, which I have to say has really helped our non-vaping enforcement, our enforcement of our non-vaping rules. So there are concrete things that we do with this data as a system to help inform our management practices, our supervision practices, and even our instructional practices, and all done to help keep our students healthy and safe. So I want to remind, and then I also wanted to remind everyone that the Issaquah School District posts all of our Healthy Youth Survey results on the ISD website, all of them, more than what Dr. Brown and his team will go over today. So you could bury yourself in Healthy Youth Survey data if you're the type of person that likes to do that, and from previous years as well. So my recommendation is just type Healthy Youth Survey into the search engine on the ISD website, and it will take you to the results for the Healthy Youth Survey. So again, thank you, Executive Director Moraldo and team over there at Influence the Choice and the foundation, and Dr. Brown and your team for this opportunity for me to speak briefly here tonight and share a little bit about how the Issaquah School District uses this information to better support our students and keep them healthy and productive. So thank you again. I look forward to hearing tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent Thiele. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nathan Brown. He's a clinical psychologist in private practice in Bellevue and Bellingham, and is a proud father of 2 graduates of our district. Dr. Brown and his organizational consulting firm, TrueBearing, have worked with ITC, ISF, and the Issaquah School District over 8 years. During that time, he and his colleagues have offered research and evaluation data that have informed the work of our organizations with Issaquah youth. Since 2014, Dr. Brown has joined us at the Action Forum for Youth to present the findings of the Healthy Youth Survey to our community, and we welcome him this evening to continue the tradition. So first, we'll hear a video presentation from Nathan, then we'll have a short amount of time for a live Q&A, as Nathan is able to join us on Zoom today. And by the way, you'll be able to watch or share his video presentation from the ISF Nourish Every Mind website, as it should be posted after this presentation. And I'll drop a link in the chat to the ISF NEM website in just a moment. So I'll start the video now.
Hello, my name is Dr. Nathan Brown, and I'm a clinical psychologist in practice in Bellevue and Bellingham. I also have the privilege of consulting with nonprofits such as the Issaquah Schools Foundation and Influence the Choice around projects like the research related to the Healthy Youth Survey. I have been doing this particular presentation for 8 years, and it has been a true joy to meet with you all year by year, even if virtually. I look forward to presenting this data to you. I have, in addition to practicing in this area, I have a particular investment in Issaquah because my 2 children are graduates of Skyline High School. So like many of you in the audience, I have a particular investment in understanding the status of today's youth. So we are going to present the Healthy Youth Survey data now, and I would like to begin by telling you some things about the Healthy Youth Survey itself. The Healthy Youth Survey has been around for several decades. It is a survey that in this particular iteration, which was 2021, the fall of 2021, was responded to by over 200,000 students from all 39 counties in the state of Washington. The Healthy Youth Survey is designed to track trends in youth behavior and to identify protective factors and risk factors that students experience with respect to the potential for substance abuse, the potential for mental health issues, and also potentially positive outcomes with respect to wellness and well-being. There are many positive aspects about the Healthy Youth Survey. I want to just speak really quickly at the beginning, though, with respect to questions about why the Healthy Youth Survey. Why do we need this kind of information? Can we even trust the test? I would like to give you 4 basic reasons why the Healthy Youth Survey is a measure that, while imperfect in some respects, is a measure that we can trust, that has reliability and validity, that we can trust in understanding the condition of our youth. First of all, this instrument was built specifically to be able to detect bias and faking and other forms of error that can slide into tests. I can give you many examples of that, but essentially there are self-corrective aspects of the test that will eliminate bias and faking. Secondly, the Healthy Youth Survey is consistent with other sources, other forms of testing, interview, focus groups, and the like. We find similar kinds of data coming out of the Healthy Youth Survey as other standardized tests. Thirdly, the Healthy Youth Survey has been consistent over time. While we see some trends, and we will discuss those trends this evening, in general, the test is reliable. We get consistent, understandable results over time. And the fourth reason that I would suggest for placing some genuine credence in the Healthy Youth Survey is that you have to ask yourself, what are we comparing it to? A Healthy Youth Survey is certainly more reliable than opinion. It's certainly more reliable than anecdotal information. It gives us an opportunity to get an objective snapshot, or if you will, a window into the status of today's youth. And the data that I'll present to you today, we will talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of the particular findings, the limitations of how to interpret it. But I want to encourage you that this is fundamentally reliable information that we can utilize. Let me begin by sharing with you the response rates to the Healthy Youth Survey by grade within the district. The slide that you see here suggests a pattern that is fairly typical from year over year, in which the younger grades tend to have a higher response rate, and that response rate drops off somewhat over time. In particular, we have 85% of 6th graders responded to the Healthy Youth Survey, 81% of 8th graders, 78% of 10th graders, and then a drop off down to 47% of 12th graders. This is typical year over year, and it nevertheless remains valid. The results remain valid across all grades. It simply affects a bit in terms of how we set the criteria for statistical significance in 12th grade. Nonetheless, that data is usable. Let me describe to you just at a high level the demographic breakdowns in the district. During 2021, the district is reporting 51% male, 49% female breakdown, slightly more males than females. In terms of ethnicity, we are at 50% white, 31% Asian Pacific Islander, 9% Hispanic and Latino, 8% mixed race. And finally, the inner circle in this chart, you can see that we have a 7% rate of free and reduced lunch. This is basically an index of socioeconomic status. These data are relatively consistent with 2018. Okay, let's talk about the Healthy Youth Survey itself and how it's structured. Healthy Youth Survey has a very specific structure. It has a section that is designed to capture demographics, such as we just discussed. It has a section in which there are many items trying to identify protective and risk factors, factors that either support students in moving towards healthy outcomes versus factors that would work against moving towards healthy outcomes. Those are broken into internal factors and external factors. I'll give some examples of those in a moment. The outcomes that the Healthy Youth Survey focuses on that we are going to emphasize today are mental health outcomes and substance abuse outcomes. And the reason for that is we're looking at those, it may be obvious, we're looking at those as being very important predictors of overall well-being for our youth and positive predictors for mental health and wellness as adults. Okay, let's take a closer look at the internal and external protective and risk factors. The Healthy Youth Survey has items that we have pulled for this presentation on internal aspects of students that are either protective or risk factors for well-being. It can be helpful to think of those items as falling under the categories of attitudes, perception of norms, sense of control. Specific examples of that might be attitudes towards substances. Is it right or wrong to utilize a substance? Perception of norms would relate to a student's sense of whether their peers, for instance, tend to approve or disapprove of substance abuse or alcohol abuse, or parents, whether their parents tend to approve or disapprove, perception of norms. Thirdly, sense of control. Sense of control is a strong predictor of well-being. It has to do with that sense that there is something I can do in my life to move the needle for myself in a positive direction. And that is a strong predictive factor, a strong internal protective factor. External factors include factors related to family support, peers, peer support in particular, and community, the level of community support. Later in the presentation, we'll look at data related to each of these. The outcomes that we're focusing on in this presentation are, as I mentioned, mental and behavioral health and substance abuse. Specifically, we're going to look at depression, anxiety, suicide, bullying, and harassment. And under substance abuse, we'll look at the data related to alcohol, marijuana, and vaping. Now, on the right side of the slide, you'll notice that we have a legend here that gives you an idea of the symbols that we use. The exclamation marks represent a notable finding. That is a finding that is at approximate high level of statistical significance. The trending data that is somewhat below that level is marked with stars. If they're positive findings, they're in green. If they're negative findings, they're in red. So as you go through the charts, these will tell you at a glance the findings that are particularly of note. Okay, let's move to anxiety. And we'll begin by just comparing the anxiety statistics in the Issaquah School District against the overall state of Washington. In this chart, we see the breakdown by grade. And what you'll notice overall is that within each grade, there is a difference between Washington and Issaquah. Specifically in grade 8, we have higher levels of reported anxiety in the state of Washington overall relative to the school district. There's a 4% drop, 4% discrepancy. In 10th grade, we have a reversal in that Issaquah is 5 points higher on anxiety than their Washington State peers. In 12th grade, we're 3 points higher than Washington State peers. Let's look at anxiety by gender, broken down by gender. This is a finding that you will see repeated nationally, and in general, it is the finding that there is a gender disparity in terms of reported anxiety. Specifically, we see in grade 8, there is a 25-point difference in the rating of anxiety for females relative to males, 25 points higher for females relative to males. In grade 10, 85% of females report experiencing anxiety, whereas males report 64%. That's a 21-point discrepancy. And in grade 12, we have a 14-point discrepancy. Now, if you step back and look at the pattern here, you'll see that there is a disparity. That disparity drops as we move up into the higher grades. In essence, the males are closing in on the females, but there is still a 14-point disparity by the time we get to 12th grade. Anxiety over time. Here we have the advantage of having done this research for multiple years, and we're looking at 2016, 2018, and 2021. We have several slides structured this way because we want to give a sense of what was happening pre-pandemic and what has happened since the pandemic. So looking at this item, what we see is that prior to the pandemic, in 8th grade, that would be the blue lines. Let's focus on the blue lines here. Rates were dropping slightly, 5-point drop. Since the pandemic, we have a 5-point rise. I'm sorry, a 3-point rise since the pandemic in grade 8. In grade 10, we show a very slight drop of 1% from 2016 to 18, but then we see a notable rise of 7 points going from 2018 to 2021. In 2021, we're seeing a discrepancy going from 2018 to 2021 of 5 points. And since the pandemic, it has risen by 9 points. So looking at this, you can see some significant changes in anxiety as we move from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. Speaking of COVID, there are items in the Healthy Youth Survey related to COVID and what some of the sources of anxiety may be for students. This slide shows us 3 of the items that are related to COVID and potential sources of concern. The 3 items that they focused on were worry about parents losing their job, worry about the family not being able to afford housing, and worry about not having enough food to eat. You see here we have the grade breakdown, grade 6, 8, 10, and 12. And the first thing that may strike you is that there is significantly more anxiety among sixth graders than the subsequent grades. We have between 2 and 3 times as much reported individuals reporting anxiety in 6th grade relative to the later grades. Grades 8 and 10 are similar in terms of their report across those 3 areas of concern. And then looking at grade 12, we see a bit of an uptick. We see in particular a rise on the fear about parents losing their job. So we have a bit of a U-shaped pattern here in which there's notably more difference, more anxiety among 6th graders. And then it seems a bit lower in those middle grades. And then it's particularly with the concern about the loss of a job, it tends to rise among 12th grade. Okay, let's turn to depression. And I want to point out that this item, which reads, during the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that you stopped doing some usual activities? This is an item that comes directly from the diagnostic manual that psychologists and other mental health professionals use. So we're getting students' response to a well-tested item. And what we see here is, in the comparison against the state of Washington, is that at all 3 grade levels, we have fewer Issaquah students reporting sadness and hopelessness than the state average. For 8th grade, it's a 13-point difference. For 10th grade, it's a 7-point difference. For 12th grade, it's an 8-point difference. So fairly notable changes or differences between Issaquah relative to the state as a whole. Let's look at depression by gender. This also fits a national trend, and this is a pattern that we have seen over decades, a discrepancy between females and males with respect to depression. In particular, you see in grade 8, females scoring 14 points higher than males. In grade 10, 20% more females reporting depression than males. In grade 12, 17% more females reporting depression relative to males. Depression over time. Let's take a look at the patterns that we see pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. What we see here is that for 10th and 12th grade, the rate in the rise of depression over the course of the pandemic has increased. For 8th grade, we have, prior to the pandemic, between 2016 and 2018, the rates rose only slightly, about 2 points. Since the pandemic, for 8th grade, rates are unchanged. However, 10th grade, prior to the pandemic, we have a slight rise, 2%. But since the pandemic, rates have trended higher, 5 points. That is a trending score. And for 12th grade, prior to the pandemic, rates had started rising. We had a 4-point rise, more than the other 2 grades. However, since the pandemic, rates have risen notably. They have risen 7 points. Pre-pandemic to, you might think of it as towards the end of the pandemic, the fall of last year. Suicide. Let's talk about the rates of suicide that the Healthy Youth Survey reports. These items also are based on clinical models of how to think about suicide. We tend to look at, first of all, the likelihood that an individual has considered suicide. Secondly, that they've actually made a plan. And thirdly, whether they have actually attempted. These are three links in the chain along the way towards an actual suicide attempt. And what we see here is a pattern in which, as one would expect in general, there are higher rates of considering, and then you have a subset of that group that actually makes a plan. And then you have a group within that that not only has considered and made a plan, but they've actually made an attempt. I find the most powerful way to look at this data to make it human, instead of looking at percentages, is to think of this in terms of numbers. So you'll see across the bottom, we have a summary here across the grades. And in 2021, during the previous 12 months, among 8th graders, 90 students actually made an attempt. 10th graders, 126 actually made at least one attempt. 12th graders, 97 made at least one attempt. That's a total of 313 students having made an attempt at suicide in 2021. These numbers are higher than many of the reported kind of incidents through law enforcement and hospitals, because there are suicide attempts that are made that are never recorded. They never come into contact with the institutions such as hospitals and law enforcement. So what we're getting here is a report directly from the students in terms of their experience around suicide. Let's look at substance abuse. The classic item in the Healthy Youth Survey for tracking substance abuse is to ask, during the last 30 days, on how many days did you use the given substance? We're looking at alcohol, marijuana, and vaping in this study. And we're counting the percentage of students who respond with any day during the last 30 days. If they use that given substance at least once in the last 30 days, we count that. So what you see here is a breakdown by grade. We go 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. As you can see, those rates generally rise from 8th, 10th to 12th grade. And you will see just visually, you'll see a steeper rise by the time you get to 12th grade. So for instance, alcohol more than triples, almost quadruples from 10th to 12th grade. Marijuana triples, a little more than triples, going from 10th to 12th grade. Vaping doubles between 10th and 12th grade. So we do see a rise between 8th and 10th, but that rise is itself dwarfed by the shift from 10th to 12th grade. Let's take a look at these patterns specifically inside of the individual grade levels and their trending over year. Again, we have data extending quite a ways back here, and we're able to chart data year over year. What we have on this chart is a comparison of 8th graders and their reported use of alcohol, vaping, and marijuana. The most striking thing on this chart, there's a lot of things we could talk about, but the most striking thing that I want to lift up for us to think about and perhaps have a conversation about in this slide and in the ones to follow is what happens between 2018 and 2021. Because what you see is a very striking drop. In fact, in 8th grade, we have a drop to 1% reported use among 8th graders in 2021. That dwarfs any change in previous years and is very much a notable finding. 10th graders, we see a very similar pattern. We see trending kind of going up and down over years, but when we get to 2018 to 2021, we have, again, a very similar drop. Now we're not at 1%, but we're still in single digits in 2021 for 10th graders' reported use of alcohol, vaping, and marijuana. Let's see what 12th graders' patterns look like. We have a bit of missing data in 2014. There were some difficulties with the data collection in that year, but you can still pick up some of the trends over time here. And again, we'll see that there is a significant drop between 2018 and 2021 across all three substances. We're down in the double digits, but under 20% rate. We're at 18% for alcohol. We're at 10% for marijuana, and we're at 12% for vaping. Again, very striking drops. It's interesting to speculate on reasons why that might be. Access may well be one of the causes for this finding. During a time of pandemic, perhaps harder for minors to get access to these substances. And there may be other reasons as well that we can discuss in the Q&A. Okay, let's look at enjoyment of school. This we tend to think of as the canary in the mine shaft item, because this is an item that if a child is enjoying school, it's safe to assume that there must be a lot of things going right for them in order for that to be the case. So if we see that go up, that probably means good news on a number of fronts in that child's life. If we see that number going down, it may be some indication of potential areas of concern emerging. You will notice that between 2014 and 2018, those findings are relatively stable across grade. We again have some interesting findings here between 2018 and 2021. In sixth grade, the amount of the percentage of students reporting that they enjoy being in school is relatively flat. But when we go to eighth graders, we see a drop. We see a drop of 9 points. And with 12th graders, we also see a drop. We're going down to 29%. We're going down 10 points. On the other hand, 10th graders, they're happy. They're rising, actually. We're going from 40% to 53%. So here's a pattern where you have 10th graders kind of cutting against the grain a bit in terms of those other upper grades. Okay, let's talk about internal factors. The question here is what helps, what hurts? What are the factors that promote positive activity with respect to mental health and substance abuse, and what are the factors that harm? This is the leverage that we have when we're trying to undertake a prevention project in working with youth, is identifying these protective and risk factors and working with them. We're going to start with internal factors, and we are specifically going to look at the perception of parents with respect to substance abuse, the degree to which the student perceives that the parent disapproves or approves. Same with the perception of peers, the degree to which their perception is that peers disapprove of substance abuse. And finally, we're going to look at perceptions of choice, the degree to which an individual has the perception that there's something that they can do. Let's take a look now at perceptions of substance use among eighth graders year over year. The striking thing about this chart, I think you may agree, is that between 2010 and 2018, there's remarkable stability in the percentage of students reporting that their parents disapprove of any of these substances. And their level of disapproval is in the middle to upper 90% level. Now, when we get from 2018 to 2021, we start to see some drop. Specifically, we see for these eighth graders, their perception of parental disapproval of alcohol drops slightly. We're now in the lower 90%, we're at 94%. For perception of parental disapproval of marijuana, we drop to 88%. We drop from the middle 90s down to 88%. And the steepest drop of all, the gray line, is the perception of peer disapproval of marijuana use. That has dropped between 2018 to 2021 from the middle 90s down to 65%. That is a very notable drop and something that we should perhaps pay closer attention to. Let's look at 10th grade. Again, you'll see some of these lines show missing data. That will be because some of these items were not included in the Healthy Youth Survey until 2014. What I'll note here for 10th graders is you have the primary shifts that we see that look like trends between 2018 and 2021. The 10th graders' perception of peer disapproval of vaping has risen. We've gone up 6 points. And the, let me find it. The 10th graders' perception of peer disapproval of marijuana has gone up. We've gone up from 73 to 82%. That's a 9% rise. That's a positive thing. That is something that we want to see. Let's look at 12th graders. 12th graders, looking at these trends, these look relatively stable. We've got a bit of a drop between 2018 and 2021 for 12th graders' perception of parental disapproval of marijuana. We do see a rise in the perception of peer disapproval of alcohol. We see that rise going from 85 to 89%. That's the blue line. And we see a 2-point drop in the perception of parental disapproval of alcohol use. So those are worth paying attention to. They are not as dramatic as the previous grades. Now, let's look at it from the other direction. This was these items related to the perception that the individual taking the test had of parents and peers. Now let's ask them, how wrong do you think it would be if someone your age were to use this item? So this is getting a little closer to home. With these items, again, we see some of these items, we see fairly mild trending. The most striking items here are in relationship to alcohol and to marijuana. You'll see those middle lines, they're overlapping quite a bit, but you'll see the gold line and the gray line. We are moving from 69% to 83 and 82% respectively. What those lines signify, the gold line signifies the degree to which the individual taking the test believed it was wrong for an individual their age to use marijuana. The gray line, the degree to which they believed it was wrong for them to use alcohol. The other trend lines are present, but they're not quite as striking. So I will leave them there, and let's move on to external factors. We're basically looking at family support, community support, and peer and pro-social involvement, the degree to which a student has access to positive pro-social experiences. As we get into this, first let me look at bullying and harassment. This is a broader topic that is an external risk factor. The item here is in the last 30 days, how often have you been bullied? If you look at this just visually, what you will probably notice is that there are drops not just between 2018 and 2021, but that this topic, we have seen downward levels of reporting virtually every year since 2012. It is perhaps one of the most positive changes that has happened in adolescent psychology over the last 10 years is the degree to which bullying is now relatively uncool. And that is consistent with a national trend among children and youth. You also see that trend has, in some respects, in some grades, has accelerated during the gap between 2018 and 2021. Specifically, we see grades 8 and 10 have dropped steeply. We're dropping by more than half the perception of, or the reporting with respect to being bullied. We also see drops at grades 6 and 12, but they are milder. Now let's change the focus to abuse by an adult. The item here, has an adult ever physically hurt you on purpose? Giving some examples and giving a concrete criteria, leaving a mark, bruise, or injury. Now note that this item is not time bound. This is not asking, has this happened in the last year? This is asking, has an adult ever physically hurt you? That means this is a cumulative report. So students are responding to whether they've ever been physically abused, not just for a recent time period. And the fact that we see some drop here between 2014 and 2021 is notable for that reason. You do see a difference between 2012 and 2014. We believe that is simply because those were years when this really became a point of publicity and a point of much discussion in the community, both in Issaquah and across the country. And we typically see a rise in reporting. People are simply more ready to report items like that when they become a matter of public debate. So that initial rates of around 20% are probably closer to what the true score has been in years even prior to 2014. What we see since then is a mild drop between 2014 and 2018. And then between 2018 and 2021, we see a drop for 10th grade of 2%. We see for 12th grade a rise, 16 to 18%, a 2-point rise, but nevertheless a rise. and a drop in 8th grade from 16 to 14%. Those 8th and 10th grade scores are trending results. They are approaching significance statistically. And so that particularly bears attention. There's a second source of information about physical abuse and child maltreatment in general, and that's DCYF. DCYF has been reporting a decline in both total reports of child maltreatment that have qualified for the need of an investigation, as well as investigations per household across King County. You can see in the upper chart, if you were to draw a trend line, you would see a drop. Those bars are dropping overall between 2017 and present. And the chart below that gives you a regional look. What we see here are various counties and the Washington state average in terms of the rate of investigations per 100,000 households. You'll notice that the state of Washington is there at about 13 per 1,000 households, excuse me. We've got Whatcom County and Skagit County at considerably higher than that. Snohomish and Island County are a bit lower than the state average. King County is significantly lower than the state average in terms of maltreatment. So this is just another convergent piece of information to give us an idea that this is an actual trend. Family support. If I had a personal problem, I could ask my parents for help. Looking at this chart, what we see is the orange space is telling us the percentage of students that are saying yes, they're endorsing that they could ask their parents for help. What we see here across grades is a bit of a mixed bag. We have 6th grade at 90%, 86% for 8th grade, 10th grade 82%, 12th grade 92%. So you actually get an increase in the perception that they could ask parents for help by the time we get to 12th grade. There's been no significant change on this particular factor since 2014 or relative to comparison against the state as a whole. On the other hand, community support, we see lower levels and we see a drop in 10th grade in particular. I will share with you, we don't have a slide for this, but I'll share with you that there is declining community support across all 3 grades of 6 to 10 points as compared to 2018. So pre-pandemic, during pandemic, we have a drop in all 3 grades in terms of the perception of support of about 6 to 10 points. That's a reversal. That is likely has something to do with lack of access. When we've been in a pandemic and we're all under quarantine, it's harder to access community support. And that may have to do with some of the rates of rising mental health and substance abuse indicators that we saw earlier. This is also a pattern that's consistent with statewide data. Finally, in this section, let's look at pro-social school involvement. This is a composite of questions that are related to opportunities for pro-social involvement at school. These are items like students saying they have lots of chances to help a teacher or work with a teacher one-on-one, be involved in sports, clubs, other activities, chances to be a part of class discussions and so forth. Items that have to do with social integration, which is a strong predictor of positive outcomes. What we see here is a comparison between Washington State overall and the district. And what we see is that for 8th grade, Issaquah is reporting higher levels of pro-social school involvement than the statewide average. That flips in 10th grade. We've got our district reporting less in the way of pro-social school involvement relative to the state. And then back to grade 12, we go back to Issaquah reporting at least 2% higher than the statewide average. Now let's look at the HOPE index. This index is a set of 5 questions that are scattered throughout the Healthy Youth Survey. And these are items that have a great deal to do with what psychologists call efficacy or sense of control. To the degree that an individual has a sense of control over their future, that's the degree to which they are going to experience a sense of hopefulness. What we see here is that we have the grade breakdown, you can see, and we've broken down the gradations of hopefulness here. And what you see here is higher levels of hopefulness in that highly hopeful section. 8th graders and 6th graders are reporting the highest levels of hopefulness in that respect. Now, relative to their peers across Washington State, 12th and 10th graders are 6 points more hopeful in the district. 8th graders are 16 points more hopeful. 6th graders are 15 points more hopeful. I want to put this presentation of data in the context of prevention and community prevention. In different ways, the Influence the Choice program, the Issaquah Schools Foundation, and the district are all partnering together in a multifaceted, multi-pronged effort to prevent mental health and substance abuse issues among students. And I want to put a little perspective here to note that that stands in a long and strong tradition in America of community prevention projects. I want to give you one example here just to illustrate. And it has to do with the 4th of July and patriotic tetanus. You may wonder what patriotic tetanus is. Well, in 1903, way back in 1903, the American Medical Association reported nearly 4,500 casualties from fireworks that were sustained on the 4th of July, mostly as a result of what they labeled patriotic tetanus. Patriotic tetanus turns out to be a malady that results from shrapnel wounds among onlookers from the fireworks. Now, a campaign across the country led by the Chicago Tribune ran for 9 years that encouraged people to have a safe and sane 4th of July and offered a number of preventive steps that they could take. For instance, standing a little further away from the fireworks, perhaps buying fireworks that have been built by a reputable manufacturer, just practical, sensible kind of items like that. But nevertheless, people had not been practicing them. By 1912, we had gone from 4,500 casualties reported to only 20. That appears to have been largely a result of this campaign that had been started by the Tribune and run nationally. And this campaign is now considered the first such public health information campaign in our country's history, remains one of the most successful. In its spirit, this is the sort of thing that ITC and ISF and the school district have partnered to promote, looking at ways we can affect those protective and factors and minimize risk factors among youth and enhance positive outcomes. Now, we have come to the end of our presentation. I hope that's given some food for thought. I've deliberately kept this mostly descriptive so that you have a sense of what the data actually says. And now I look forward to the conversation that we'll all have about the data. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Nathan, for that robust presentation. So much data for us to process. So I'll open it up to questions from the audience. And if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and I'll try to go through and curate the questions for Nathan to address. So while our audience is providing some of the questions for us, I wanted to remark that I found it interesting how the data supports some of what we talk about in prevention work when we talk about protective factors. We know that parent involvement in a student's life is a key protective factor that can help students make healthy choices rather than using alcohol and other substances. And during the pandemic, parents were much more available and involved, and it seems to have impacted student substance use. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's striking. I think that, and I'm going to say this from the standpoint of having worked with the foundation and worked with Influence the Choice for many years. The notion of using messaging campaigns to, for instance, put out the information that parents actually have greater levels of disapproval around substance abuse than the kids might think. Messages like actual use is lower, use by peers is lower than an individual student might think. Those are perceptions that move behavior. And we've seen that in various places over the years with this data. We see it in this year as well. I do want to say that the rates in substance abuse, those drops that we saw down into single digits are stunning drops. Those drops really dwarf anything that we've seen in the 10 or 12 years that we've been collecting data. And I think the messaging campaigns and so forth can account for some of that. I think we also maybe have some lessons to learn from this. Access, for instance, I think it's logical to assume had something to do with those drops during the pandemic. And I think it may be interesting for us to look a little deeper into the reasons for those declines. It may give us some ideas about future messaging campaigns and future prevention strategies.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I have one question here from Barb D. Michelle, who happens to be the chair of the board of directors for Influence the Choice. So she is wondering, what are some of the ways we can dig deeper into the why of the drop in substance use?
Into the why. Beyond this data, there actually is more data in the Healthy Youth Survey that might give us some ideas about that. There are hundreds of items in this survey, and some of them get at attitudes, some of them get at perceptions of control and so forth that were beyond the scope of this presentation. I think we can get some clues from those as to what some of the protective factors have been during this time. Beyond that, it would be interesting perhaps to do some focus groups within the district and see if we can get some direct information from students about what their experience is or their perceptions of other peers with respect to substance use. That could give us some ideas about the why. It might be an interesting question to pose to our students who are coming up in a few minutes as well.
Right. And so one of the other questions is whether or not the positive impacts of students spending more time with their parents due to the pandemic.
I think there's evidence in this data that that's absolutely the case, that that there have been benefits to being around, family being around each other more, parents being around their kids more. Yes.
So parents, even if you think your kids think you're uncool, you really are providing a benefit spending some time with them. And so one to say, it was interesting, you mentioned a few things on these focus groups, and I'm hoping that my staff is taking notes. So what areas do you think we might want to prioritize in asking those questions in those groups?
Well, in my mind, I always want to go back to those three core categories of protective factors. We want to look at perceptions of attitudes towards substances and drilling a little further into what the experience was for kids during the pandemic with respect to, how they saw drug use during that time, how they saw alcohol use during that time. That would be one important one. Secondly, the whole notion of the fancy word is efficacy, the perception that students actually can make choices that are moving them in a positive direction. For instance, one common thing with kids is the perception that they if they're going to be in a peer group, they have to use because that's what other people in the peer group are doing. It would be interesting to see how that changed and if that those perceptions of efficacy changed during the pandemic.
And I think Katie Muller, our youth development manager, is probably really shouting from the rooftop, positive community norms, talking about what are the positive community norms within our system and trying to reinforce those with students that, hey, most kids do think that it's unhealthy for you to be using substances. Yes. You may think there's a lot of peer pressure to do it, but for most kids, they think, no, this isn't a good idea. So that's great to hear. There's some significant drops in bullying in grades 8 and 10. And how much do you think that is attributed to the fact that students were in remote learning as compared to other factors?
I think those are that issue, the issue of access defined in different ways is just woven all through these results. If you have an individual who might be inclined to bully and he doesn't have anyone near him to bully because he's at home, bullying rates are going to decline. So that kind of thing also may be useful to explore a little further in a focus group.
Great. And then we had a question about somebody who knows about a program that worked in the UK. And I will give my email address here eventually, or maybe a staff member can put in how to contact us. If you want to provide us more information, we are always ready to be learning about what we can do, what type of programs to target, and better prepare students to make those healthy choices as they move into their adult life.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the clock and I know I've got some great students and a student panel. So if we don't have any other questions, certainly want to move into speaking with our students. So thank you so much, Nathan. This I know took a lot of work to put together, but that information is really going to help. I know both Issaquah Schools Foundation and the Influence the Choice to look at our programming over the next 12 months and what we can be doing to really serve students. So thank you so much.
You are welcome. Thank you.
Right. We're so pleased to be joined by our three students, Julia Krupkin, Addie Powell, and Cameron Moss. So I have three questions now. Cameron, I know that you might need to drop out of here because you have more stuff going on. Like many students, there's 100 different things you want to be involved in. So feel free when you need to go ahead and do that. So the first question I had was, data shows a significant drop in vaping, not just in our schools, but in the state. So how does this data compare to your experiences at school?
I can jump in first. Honestly, I think why the numbers have decreased is just simply lack of access. I don't think the desire to do it has gone away. Honestly, since being in, so when school ended, I was in 9th grade and I was still wrapped up in trying to figure out high school. And now going back to 11th grade, I would say it's honestly increased. And I'm not sure if I'm just more aware of it now. But the fact that it's gone down is shocking. And that is not what I would have guessed.
I can jump in next if that's
Perfect.
okay. I was just gonna say, I mean, first off, like I'm nowhere in a position like in general, and I don't think anyone else is to like necessarily judge anyone who vapes, obviously. Everyone goes through different things, and I think it also has a big dependability on the mental health of like students. But I would actually agree. I think it would be a little bit shocking that the numbers have decreased just because what I've seen at school, what other people talk about at school, or it might just be the fact that, you know, the last time we were in person, for me personally, I'm a junior, was like my freshman year, and I didn't really necessarily know what that was. So maybe I wasn't just personally aware of it, and maybe more upperclassmen were doing it and I just wasn't knowledgeable. But I think that I could see it either way. You know, lack of access is a really good point as well.
What are your thoughts, Julia?
I would say, so this is my first year in a public school setting and I'm a freshman, so I didn't really see the before picture. But currently I would say there's definitely still a desire among my peers, and I would just agree with what Addie and Cameron said. I think that it really does have to do with access and the decline in access over the pandemic. Maybe that's what encouraged some people to stop, and now they've stopped. But I do find that information a little bit surprising as well.
Okay, well, that's good for us to know, and especially as we proceed throughout, you know, the next phase of getting back to school and how we work with students. So thank you so much for that. The next question I have is, how do you think the pandemic has impacted alcohol use amongst teens? Are you surprised by the reduction in that data as well? And do you think that trend will continue?
I can jump in if that's okay. I would actually say that it does still surprise me. I think honestly, it seems kind of like it's been the same for a long time. You know, I have two older brothers, and from what they've told me and their experiences in high school as well, they're a lot older, that, you know, they think that it's relatively the same as what I share with them. Another reason though that I could see it declining is because of COVID, you know, forcing us to necessarily be stuck with our family. And I think that has led to like closer relationships in some circumstances. In other circumstances, it could lead to problems. But in some circumstances, it could lead to like a potential growth within a parent-child relationship, thus leading to like not necessarily a need to drink alcohol or anything like that, or they don't really care to anymore, or don't care to rebel in that sense either.
Great.
Yeah, I would say, I think for me, the reasoning that I first think of is like during the pandemic, there weren't parties happening, people weren't going to friends' houses as much. And I think that for the most part, that is where high schoolers are drinking and having that alcohol, and having access to that alcohol. And I personally would not be surprised to see the rates of using alcohol go up again once, or like now that we're kind of back to a slightly more or slightly less COVID stricken world. And I think that it's likely the party scene coming back that's probably going to be increasing that again.
Okay.
Wrap
What
up
about you,
I was
Andy?
Thinking. I would definitely say drinking is more of a social thing among high schoolers, where vaping is kind of an independent, you do it socially, but also it's more so on your own, you do it at home. But yeah, I think the decrease in just being able to see people. I mean, I was locked in my house for a year, I didn't see anybody. And so just simply not being around other peers, kind of the alcohol party scene just faded out.
And I know this isn't among the questions that I gave you in advance, but I'm kind of wondering about social media influencers, because what I do find is that things like YouTube or Twitch or Instagram don't have really any limitations on whether or not an influencer is using vaping while on screen or using alcohol on screen. And do you think that impacts students that are coming up, especially at a younger age? Or do you say they may be doing it, but I'm still going to make the choices I'm going to make?
I think that it could impact younger students. I don't think that it would be the key factor. I don't think that like content creators have as much of an impact on us as family or friends or peers, but I think that it could be a factor for younger students, probably not as much for older students.
I completely agree with what Julia is saying. I think that with younger students, I think they kind of look up at those individuals in social media a little bit more as you do than when you get older. You know, if you get asked the question, like, who's your role model when you're a little bit younger, you could say like, you know, the first man on the moon, or like someone very like ambitious that you've never necessarily met. But I think as you get older, you kind of stop, not necessarily stop caring, but like in a way, stop caring as much about those people that don't really affect you in your personal life. And you start to like really look up to and get certain attributes from those that you surround yourself by, and that like the closest people to you.
Right. So all those social influencers aren't actually influencers. That's good to hear. And then finally, the question I wanted to ask was, how much do you think the increase in feeling sad is related to the events of the past 2 years, really through what students went through with COVID? And what other factors do you think might be contributing to the rise in depression beyond living through the pandemic over the past 2 years?
I would say that the pandemic definitely has a lot to do with it. I know that me and friends of mine like went through a lot of isolation, and like dealing with that was really hard throughout the pandemic. So I think that isolation is a key part of that, and a key part of that rise in depression. And then I would say for currently, I think aside from the pandemic, okay, well, this is pandemic related, but just all of the shifts in our world that like we are constantly seeing. And even just like the shifts in school and like masks, no masks, virtual, in person, it's just so much to take in. And I think that that overwhelm and stress can often get to students and create create that spiral and those mental health challenges.
I would totally agree with that as well. I think that isolation within COVID and being quarantined, especially for those that might not necessarily have the best relationship with their parents, definitely had the biggest mental effect on us. But at the same time, I would also agree with the fact that I think the stress and the anxiety that comes with coming back from COVID, you know, some of us haven't really been in school, really. I mean, we had online for a year, but to what extent is that really like real school? We haven't had like a real school day or a real school like week or year since like 2 years ago or 3 years ago was our last full year. And not only does it come with school, but the pressure of having to do academics, get good grades, as well as like extracurriculars, you know, being in clubs, being in sports. I think that's just part of like the social pressure and culture that is within the Issaquah School District, which I think is another issue, but I think that's something that we all feel. And I think because of that, especially not having to worry about that within COVID, that has made us feel even more overwhelmed and anxious as we're coming back.
And do you think that there's some of that anxiety around, we expect you to just pick up like nothing ever really happened? Are you getting that kind of sense in the classroom or in the school?
I think that teachers are super conscious about it. I think, you know, they think it's hard coming back, and I think they for sure recognize it. And I can see some curriculum that's like toning down a little bit because they know that we've had a hard couple of years, and they know that it's going to be hard to transition back, and that it's going to be too hard for us to study and things like that. So I would definitely say a lot of, at least my personal teachers, recognize the struggle of coming back from COVID.
And I heard one student call it that recently. I heard somebody say that having the social stamina for a full day of school is exhausting. And are you finding, so I'm seeing nodding heads. So is that really kind of a factor, especially, you know, Julia, you were talking about isolation and a year of feeling very isolated. Has that been a real struggle to re-engage?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say since I wasn't in a public school setting last year, we were able to go in person a little earlier than the Issaquah School District. And like every day on the ride home from school, I was asleep. Like I was just out. I was so exhausted, and that's still relevant now. It's just, it takes so much energy. And, you know, like I was talking about, like the constant shifts. And like even now, like seeing people's faces, it's like weird to process. And it's just like everything stacks up.
Great. Addie, what are your thoughts?
I think the depression has increased because, so honestly, when the pandemic first started, I was kind of on my own. I didn't really have a solid group of friends. I kind of, everything had just blown up. And so the first like 6 months of the pandemic, I loved it. I didn't have to worry about the social scene had always stressed me out. I found a lot of things I loved, and then I kind of just started like working, you know, the old like work on yourself thing. I was working out, running, eating, like it was all of these things. And then as it wore on, it did become really isolating, and you know, it became hard to get out of bed. It's like, oh, well, I can do school, you know, in bed in pajamas. Why would I get up? And then it just became this like continual, and then going back to school, it's like we're all dumped into this. And I don't know, I haven't had the same experience with teachers. I'm only there for one class, and I'm taking college courses. But yeah, it's tiring. And you know, not only then are we dealing with school, but now we're back into finals. Like I had my first set of finals in like normal finals for over 2 years. And I don't know how I did it. Like, I honestly don't know how I got through my first semester of 9th grade and got through finals. Because I only have one, and I like don't know how to function with it. And then you also have all of the, so like when we got back to school, the amount of fights that went on, like physical punching, like it was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was like you let a bunch of wild animals back into this cage and we all had to figure out how to work together again. And there's just a lot of social pressure. And I think it will continue to rise, especially as we all try to adapt again. Because there's pressure for how you dress, how you speak, what grades you're getting. Is it cool to get good grades or is it not cool to get good grades? There's so much we have to now figure out again. And so I would not be surprised if it continued to rise.
Well, that's really interesting perspectives. I think the last question I would have that I didn't give you in advance would be around the bullying data, because I think some of that went away because you just weren't surrounding. Do you think since the Healthy Youth Survey was taken in October, and now you look now, do you think those numbers would be different if we were to have that survey today rather than in October when school had just started back up?
I can jump in there. I would definitely think they would be higher. I feel like, honestly, we all kind of came back and we're on our best behavior because we were just so happy to be back in person and not stuck in front of a computer. And so it was kind of that honeymoon phase of like, oh my God, I get to go to class. I'm going to sit on a desk and use a pencil. And it was like this whole thing. And now that we're getting back into it, I would say they've definitely gone back up. People are comfortable again. The threat of going back into online school is kind of gone. And so we all just have kind of gone back to doing what we're doing.
I would actually argue for the lesser extent of that. I think that at least at Skyline, I think honestly, we're at such a stage in like the year, it's May, we just want summer, like everyone is really burnt out, especially like personally, I'm in the International Baccalaureate Career Program, and a lot of the students I surround myself by are also in the IB-CP program or IB Diploma program, or just other students in general in my grades. In my grade as a junior, I think we're all so stressed out that none of us really care in that sense about how other people present themselves or how other people what's the word? Sorry, I'm like blanking right now. But in that sense, I think it would be about similarly the same, only because we're so burnt out that we don't necessarily care that much about people that aren't necessarily our friends or like that we don't know.
So almost I can't be bothered with bullying you right now. I've got too much going on.
Yeah.
Well, and I hope some of what Dr. Brown said is that, are we getting to the point where bullying people is starting to become uncool? Are people starting to step out and go, hey, that's not cool to be treating that person that way?
I do think so. I feel like I have seen that recently. Like in my school, there's definitely like the vast majority of people, if they're not, in the scene saying, hey, that's not okay, they're checking in with the person, they're talking to, teachers about it. And it just feels like, yeah, bullying really isn't cool. Thank you all for starting to recognize that, it definitely does seem like there's been a progression.
Great. Cameron, I note that you have to check out. I had one other question from the audience for the other two that are remaining. So thank you so much, Cameron, for participating and giving us your insight. And then Addie and Julia, what do you see or feel about increased online gaming use? And is that an additional social use area, so like social media, social use area that we need to track? I know that for some students, they don't have a lot of in-person relationships as much as they do their online friends. And is that something we need to start considering?
I don't really think so, if I'm being honest. Online friends are legitimate friends. And I think that that's something that older generations have trouble seeing a lot of the time. And I don't really think that it's an issue that needs to be tracked.
So to be totally honest, I know nothing about online gaming. I couldn't tell you like anything about any of it. I have no knowledge of it. I don't think it's necessarily something that you need to be tracking. I would say more so teaching online safety, because it's not going to go away. I mean, it is so ingrained in, like, I grew up watching TV and iPads, and like, so that was like how kind of we all grew up. And so it's more about, rather than like preventing students from doing it or, you know, whatever, teaching them how to be safe. You know, don't give people your information, which seems like common sense, but you would like, it would be shocking how many times people are giving out phone numbers and emails to people they don't know. So more teaching the safety of it rather than trying to limit it.
Well, and the internet never forgets, right? A lesson that you may not learn until you try to apply for your first job. So thank you so much for your input and for sharing with us. You know, we can take a look at the data all day long, but it really is impactful when we get to hear directly from students. So I appreciate your time today. The last thing is we wanted to welcome State Representative Lisa Callan. So Representative Callan serves on the ITC Board of Directors as our government sector rep. She previously served as a member of the Issaquah School Board and has maintained her passion for helping students in the ISD. So it's always beneficial for us to get her insight onto what is happening in Olympia and to have that connection. So I've asked her to take a few minutes to provide us with an update on legislative action taken over this past legislative session.
Hello all, and thank you for your passion and energy to stay connected and learn so much about what's going on with our youth and connected to school. And just, you know, huge thanks to our student panel. Their insights, their honesty, and just bringing the truth, you know, to the forefront on what and how school is showing up for them, how behavioral health is showing up for them. It's just so critical for us as adults to stop and listen and pay attention, because it's how the system is showing up to them and how we as adults are showing up to them that really matters. So thank you for that, and taking the time to really engage and share and being willing to be open and sharing with us in that space. For the legislative update, you know, some of the biggest news is one of the largest investments since the McCleary settlement. This last legislative session was an increase in the apportionment around the allocation that comes from the state to school districts for the positions that support student physical and emotional health, so nursing and behavioral health. And I will be the first to tell you that even though there was an increase in apportionment, meaning the number of nurses or counselors that you can have per student that gets allocated to school district, it's still a far cry away from where we need to be for our students, as far as I'm concerned. So very excited for those steps forward in that funding. I'm sure that school districts will put it to good use. In fact, for one of the only areas that education funded has been categorically targeted outside of special education and transportation and those others. They're also, the legislature also required this new apportionment to be sure that it was spent specifically on those positions to be hired for school districts. So that is, it's from my perspective, good news. We want to make sure we have counselors and nurses in our schools and doing all of that support. But like I said, there's just a lot more work to be had there. I serve as the co-chair of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group for the state. And one of the other big legislative pieces that moved this session, which is really just a starting point for the long-term work that the state has to do, is to develop a Washington state vision for behavioral health for our students, for actually perinatal phase. So really starting, you know, at that 0 in birth all the way through youth transitioning into adulthood. So through the age of 25. So what is the continuum of care of services? What does it look like for prevention, as far as we talk about with our K-12 students and suicide prevention? So the prevention, but also promotion of health and well-being. What does that look like and mean? And how do we intersect our healthcare systems with our K-12 system and making sure that we're really bringing forward a robust curriculum and influence in that perspective and teaching that well-being. And then providing that, again, that continuum of care that starts and supports not only in our schools during the school day, but outside of our schools and intersects with our community and what our community access to care is, so that we have early intervention, we have behavioral health care that is easily accessible through your primary care providers. We can have good connections and links to providing services and supports that may not be happening in school that can be happening outside of school. And then our partnerships with those providers that are outside of the school, connecting in with how the behavioral health impacts for our youth might be impacting our youth in their ability to learn and feel safe in a school environment. So the strategic plan is the bill that was passed, and it will start with describing a landscape. What is the behavioral health continuum of care landscape for all of those ages and all the types of services, starting with the promotion of well-being all the way through crisis services and crisis recovery and ongoing well-being. And then it'll be a gap analysis, and then looking at what is it going to take to get to where we need to be, which is really providing care and supports and learning, not only to our children, but also to our families and to our communities, and the actual delivery of services where every child needs the service, when the child needs the service, to try to help really address the whole child and the need of what we need to do so they can learn, so they can feel safe, and so our families can thrive, and they have their best chance, of course, of a great future, not only in school, but also in their post-secondary careers and choices and where they want to be, and are confident in who they are, and can engage with community and can engage and be our leaders of tomorrow and all of that great stuff. So that was another great win. Again, the long-term support, one of the other areas we worked on is trying to figure out how to increase the workforce around behavioral health across the state in every field. The behavioral health workforce in general lost about 30% of its workforce during the pandemic, a significant loss when the need and demand was exponentially increasing. So our community-based organizations are running very thin. Our state agencies are running very thin. And we know that it's very challenging to find counselors and behavioral health providers and clinicians in community. It's also very hard for school districts to hire these folks and to find them and to stay connected in this work. So really trying to figure out what we can do to help stabilize that workforce and grow that workforce. Again, those are all multi-year steps and stages to really see that outcome, stuff that we needed to take steps on today to see that outcome in the out years, but also then making immediate investments, including ensuring that we are doing the smaller things. It's small, but it was actually, I think, a big thing. Our students came and supported legislation to make sure that every school district were recognizing that mental health absences from school should be considered the same as a physical health and can be excused. Now, that was already state law, but it was not very clear and not consistently applied. And we were seeing that school districts across the state, kids were actually not being excused for their absences of what they were doing to take care of their mental health, whether it was to go see a counselor, whether it was just needing to take a day back off because of a high anxiety stress day or whatever that case may be. So you can imagine the added anxiety and load of having to make up or not even being able to make up the work because it was designated an excused absence, or having to navigate that with family and teachers and staff, and trying to, have a conversation around that when you're just trying to really figure out what's the best thing for you as a student to manage your mental health. So that was another area on that space. And then, of course, did some work on increasing capacity on referral and access for students to be able to call in, and for families to call in to try to get connected to clinicians that match their insurance with the need that was presenting itself for families. We were also able to do some work around increasing intensive outpatient services and partial hospitalization services for children and youth. We saw a significant increase, in particular in anxiety, depression, and eating disorders in female teens and over the pandemic. And the wait lists to get into these programs were significant. Finding clinician were months, and even some of the Medicaid providers had zero access for months on end. So really working to figure out how we could increase that capacity and that service. It actually reached a crisis point just because we didn't have the capacity in community with clinicians earlier on. So as you left that behavioral need unaddressed, it just continued to climb in crisis. So a lot of stuff working on both immediate response and access all the way through to long-term planning and what we need to do and integrate. And then just continuing to make sure that we're working on figuring out how we can best support our school districts with the supports and services and integrate in a kind of a tiered response level. I know the Issaquah School District has been doing this for years and continues to build out a robust program where you have a multi-tiered support systems of support. So tier 1, meaning that's just universal supports. Every student gets this, you have access to counselors, you have that when I was talking about the curriculum on mental health and sound health and well-being, curriculum on substance use and disorder. What does that look like and mean? So every student reaches that. And then the tier 2 and tier 3, where it's just, climbing up in terms of supports and needs for students and making sure that you're connecting and finding a pathway to connect to those students. That you saw the numbers on anxiety and depression, suicidality, and what we can do around bringing students back in after they've had some crises and reintersecting into not only their health and well-being for learning, but making sure that, again, they're feeling safe and confident and supported to make sure that they can stay focused and meet that. You heard the conversation around the social stamina of just coming back from the pandemic and what does that look like and mean, right? And if you are a student that's also working through high anxiety or you're working through a lot of other issues on top of that, that stamina to be able to persist day after day and in, wanting to make sure we've got that wrapped around supports, and school districts have the means to be able to do that. So I'm talking fast because I'm trying to get it all in and see what there is, but I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and I'm always happy to talk to anybody about any of these issues. And if you've got thoughts and ideas and ways we need to do, connect the work of Influence the Choice, connect the work of the Schools Foundation, connect the work of the school district to our healthcare systems and what we can do at the state and what we should be doing at the state and paying attention to. I am always happy to have those conversations in a deep way and maybe not spew at 90 miles an hour to try to get the points in, but to talk about in depth, a little bit more detail about how all of that kind of unfolds itself.
Great, thank you. I know we're running a few minutes over, but if we have any questions from the audience, I do want to give you a chance to tap in and type that in the chat. And I agree. So Pam right now is saying thank you so much for your support around behavioral health, and we appreciate the partnership of this work. Definitely the school district, ISF, and ITC partnering together to support students as much as we can. So thank you for that. I do want to say that our students were really active in looking at ways that we can have more local funding around prevention activities, using especially around the marijuana tax. So we're trying to think, I don't remember if Nathan mentioned it in his presentation, but I think it's 8th graders that really don't have a memory of life before marijuana was legal in the state. So that's crazy to think that we've got young people now that don't remember a time when marijuana was illegal, and how is that impacting their perception of the risk of the substance. So I think we've got some work to do, and we appreciate you being in the legislature to be able to voice those concerns that rise out of our community. Let me see. So I know that a lot of other people have to go off. So I do want to say thank you, not only to you, Representative Callan, but I also wanted to say thank you to all those that assisted today with our presentation. So to Superintendent Thiele, to Dr. Brown, and to our fantastic students, Julia, Addie, and Cameron. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate that you came out. We hope you found this information valuable. And if you'd like to support the work of ITC or ISF, you can always find us, Google us, and check out our websites, especially as Issaquah Schools Foundation has its Nourish Every Mind activities going on. And for Influence the Choice, we are in the last 17 months of our federal grant and are always looking for ways to pursue life after federal funding. So if you do have a chance to and an opportunity to support us, feel free to find our websites. And with that, I say thank you very much, and I hope you have a great evening.